Hello and a very warm welcome to episode number 3 of Owls About Stat, looking at Sheffield Wednesday by numbers. I'm James Marriott from the Wednesday Week. We did promise that we were going to do a couple of episodes in a week, which was kind of 2-3 weeks ago. It's taken us a little bit longer to get around to doing this one because things keep changing. So, we've just been kind of hanging on, but we are finally back. James Allen from the Owls Americast is with us. And James, you are still in good old Blighty at the moment?
I am, yeah. It still gets dark at 4 p.m. and I still have a lot of beer to work through from my Christmas haul. So both aspects are great.
That's good. Peter Lohman in Denmark. Peter, you're just telling us just how many new beers you've tried over Christmas. I'm quite proud of you. What was the grand total?
It's actually the month of December, but it's 17.
Yeah, the whole month of December counts as Christmas now. You realise that?
All right, okay. I didn't realise, no. Sorry.
Okay, so the last episode of this that we recorded was just after the fans forum, and also obviously just after the sacking of Jos. Things were still a little bit up in the air about how it was going to play out over the kind of the days and the weeks that would follow that. Now we've got a little bit more certainty about how things are going to unfold, certainly in terms of dates. So, let's kind of take this one by one. So first up, let's look back at the reign of Jos Luhukay as Sheffield Wednesday manager, and the bare stats look like this. He started on the 8th of January last year. He left the club on the 21st of December last year. So, just under 12 months. 48 games that he presided over, 16 wins, 13 draws, 19 defeats, leaving a win ratio, is that the right win percentage, I think is the right phrase, of 33.33. So, that is absolutely, 1/3 of games that we won under Jos. Peter, any other stats that you kind of want to bowl in about the Jos era?
Yeah, if you look at at his record, it's actually quite close to a position of like 14th or 15th in an average year with the points he'd win with a record like that. And the funny thing is, he when he took us over, we were 16th with 30 points from 26 matches, and when he left us, we were 18th with 24 points from 22 matches. So we were actually in a worse state when he left than when he joined us, even though we were at a really low ebb when he joined us. So that it's not really a good reign for him, is it? And I think the other interesting thing is, if you look at, rather than the win ratio, if you look at his points per game, you have to go all the way back to Brian Law's for a record as low as Luhukay's, and to Chris Turner to get a record even lower than his. And no manager since Chris Turner has conceded as many goals on average as Luhukay's Wednesday team has. And finally, he was in charge for 48 matches, as you said, and in those 48 matches, he's used a grand total of 38 players, which, considering he only signed 3, is quite staggering, isn't it? And it tells you something about the turmoil that he joined in, but also left the club in, you could say.
Yeah, that seems astonishingly high. 38 in 48 games. Have we got kind of a benchmark to compare that to? What would kind of be average in something like 48 games?
There's some stats talking about this and squad turn and what have you. I think most successful teams tend to not use as many players, simply because if you win a game, you're more likely to pick the same team. So I don't have a number at hand, but I've seemed to remember like a number for a full season of around 25, 26 players for most of the teams that are doing well, and usually you'll see the teams that aren't doing well having a larger number, simply because they're trying to find the winning formula.
The interesting thing that we'll never find in a number, unfortunately, is the number of different formations and team setups that Jos used in his 48 games. Right, that would take some real qualitative analysis to compare to the actual number of players used. But I would imagine it's probably not far off 38, which may explain something about his win percentage as well.
And you're actually jumping the gun a bit there, James, because we've got a bit of a mailbag from the first episode with people asking questions, and that's actually one of the questions we'll be looking into. So that's a bit of a primer for later in the pod.
That's exciting. We'll have a look at that. James, so Jos, actually in his kind of year in charge, only brought 3 players into the club. So Joey Pelupesi, who obviously was a permanent signing, 2 loan signings in Josh Onomar and Michael Hector. And obviously it's kind of been slightly complicated at times with the transfer embargo and stuff like that. So it's probably a little bit unfair to kind of rate him on the players that he brought in. But what do you kind of make of the legacy now of Jos? Or do we just write this year off, forget about it?
So I guess there's a generous answer to that, James, and there's a realistic answer. If I start with the realistic answer, and I think we've addressed this a little bit when we talked on the Wednesday week last week. Yeah, the reality is we're no further forward a year later than we were when he was appointed last January. In fact, as Peter's just pointed out, we're actually probably an offset to where we were in the league at the point where he took over. So, in real terms, it feels like a year wasted. What I would say, if I'm being generous, is that we will always feel the benefit from the youth that he's blooded. I think one of the things that doesn't convey in the numbers is just how stubborn a manager he was, and just how hard he made decisions and affected players as a result. But because of his commitment to bring the youth through, we have several players who are certainly, able to play a role in a championship squad now. Judd Thornley, Cameron Dawson, Matt Penny, etc., and actually who now have value to the club as well. So we may not see the benefit of Jos Luhukay's reign at Wednesday for some time, but it may just be there's a bit of monetary throwback from some of those decisions that he took some way down the line.
Okay, fair enough. Let's put Jos to bed. Let's never speak of him again. Let's move on then to a very different sort of mini era. So 4 games with Lee Bullen in charge. Looks like that's going to be pretty much it now in terms of his caretaker stint in charge of the club. But 4 games, 2 wins and 2 draws, so undefeated for Lee Bullen. Let's kind of look at the numbers then, because Peter, it kind of feels like we've gone from kind of being one of the worst teams in the league to suddenly being one of the best teams in the league. But, I mean, do the stats kind of bear that out at all?
Yeah, that's actually not far off the mark. I mean, in the first episode we introduced the term expected goals. And just to give a quick brush up on that term, it's the locations of shots and under what circumstances they're hit. You can see what the historical average of shots from that position that end up as a goal, and you can tally those shots together over a full game, and then you get an idea about the quality of chances the team has created, and also the quality of chances the team has conceded. And the interesting thing is, under Luhukay, we were one of the worst teams in the division defensively when you look at expected goals. Under Bullen, in the 4 games just played, if you create a league table of expected goals for the last 4 games, our expected goals against would actually be the second best of the championship, which is quite remarkable to be quite honest. And we were about 10th in the expected goals created, which is also better than under Luhukay. So we've improved somewhat in an attacking sense, but it's a complete transformation defensively. And I mean this meets the eye test as well, because that's what we've been seeing, the stability afforded by Westwood in goal and Hutchinson screening the defence and dropping in between the centre backs to create stability.
And maybe a bit of context helps, Peter, right? Because we talked in the earlier pods about the fact that we weren't really creating chances, but and correct me if I'm not reading the numbers completely correctly, but over the 4 games that Lee Bullen was in charge, our expected goals was something in the region of about 5-6 goals over the course of 4 games, which compares very favorably with teams who, at least are renowned as being, a little bit more free scoring, not least our city neighbours, who had an average of about 6 over the same period. You look at teams like, Swansea that were maybe creating a little bit more, but Villa are right up there. West Brom, who are the highest scorers in the division at roughly the same ratio. So what it's basically telling you is we've become much more creative in a very short space of time. And then the ranking when it comes to goals against is astonishing in terms of the turnaround. From pretty much the leakiest defence in the division to one of the tightest in 4 games just speaks volumes about organisation and deploying our players in sensible ways.
The other thing that I find quite interesting, and I'm kind of thinking aloud here, following on from what we talked about on the Wednesday week last night, but is the difference in terms of the average age of the starting 11 under Bullen, and what significance or otherwise we can place on that, because there's no doubt that the age of the starting 11 has gone up under Bullen, because he has very much played the more senior players as his first choice. Obviously, it has led to an improvement of things on the pitch. So I think we were talking kind of what late 20s has been the average starting age for the West Brom game. Is that right, Peter?
Yeah, that's about right. And it was even higher for the Birmingham game, because Westwood returned in goal, so that alone is about another year. So it's quite interesting how you can see, and I'm sorry to bring back Luhukay now. You just banished him forever to the to the hell to which he belongs in Wednesday history. But before we hired Luhukay last season, we had the 3rd highest average age of a starting 11 of 28.5. And this season, we actually, up until December 30th, we actually had the 10th lowest with 26.4 years of age. So that tells you a lot about how he's changed the average age, and as you said, it's I can't remember the number exactly, but it's around probably around 28, 29 for the Birmingham game. So in a sense, you could say we've completely transformed the team, but the investment in the future of the club that Luhukay was, as you mentioned before, James, was trying to do, has been put aside, you could say, and some of the players that we're playing now that are doing well in George Boyd and Westwood, we really don't know whether they're going to be at the club in 6 months' time. So there's an argument to be made that the job at hand for the new manager is to find a balance between what Bullen has done by essentially wiping out the year Luhukay was in charge and returning to a known formula and a known group of players that know each other and trust each other, and then trying to transition in some of the younger players that Luhukay desperately tried to mold into a team earlier.
Okay, you referenced the new manager in there, so let's talk a bit about Steve Bruce. We did discuss him a little bit in the last episode. It was kind of all the talk was about Steve Bruce being the guy that's coming in. We know that he is. Starts at the beginning of February. So well, let's look a little bit at his managerial career. So he's been managing for just over 20 years now. It was 1998 when he took on his first job in management. He's managed 9 clubs in that period. He's won promotion 4 times. He's got an average win percentage of 40.3. And actually some of the clubs that he's managed along the way have got, really quite good records, to be fair. Villa, who he left surrounded in a pool of cabbage, he had a win percentage there of 45.1, which is not bad at all for this level, but obviously didn't get them he didn't get them promoted. We've had a bit more time to kind of sort of reflect and think about it. We were probably a little bit negative about the appointment of Steve Bruce in the last episode, where we said, we're probably going to be sat here again in a year's time talking about who's going to be next. Any change in that opinion, James?
Well, actually, yes. So I'm going to try and stick to the numbers here and not get too deep in kind of the emotive side. Just the emotion in just a very short form is the fact that everything suddenly feels a little bit more exciting about Sheffield Wednesday all over again. We're working with somebody who's won league championships, who knows pretty much anybody there is to know at the top of the game. That kind of suddenly gives you a buzz about Wednesday. But the numbers, we were a little bit hard maybe on Bruce in talking about the fact that he's a manager who spends, right? His outlay on players at Villa and at Hull and Pryor is pretty high. But I saw some interesting statistics looking at the total amount he invested in players at Hull, which was not inconsiderable. It was sort of the 20-30 million mark. But the return on those players, the compound value that they sold them for, was up in the 50-60 million mark. So, he actually has a record of moving players on and for good fees, as well as for bringing players in. And maybe that gives us a little bit of heart as we think about the challenge ahead for Wednesday, and the fact that we do need to get into that wheeling and dealing that we've been talking about, and maybe move on some elements of the squad and generate decent money for them. So yeah, feeling a little bit more optimistic. I mean, I think, that all the reservations around the overall forward strategy of the club and whether he fully constitutes that notwithstanding, I think in listening to the perspectives of a whole number of people around football, I feel more encouraged by just how warmly he's been received.
Obviously, the other thing that we talked about was firstly, where the money's come from to actually bring in a manager like Steve Bruce. I think, a month ago I was one of those people saying, I don't think it's realistic. I don't think he's in the kind of the right sort of ballpark that we can be affording to bring into the club. But evidently I was wrong. But there's still this talk about him having some money to spend in January, and having a lot of, say, possibly complete control over transfers. We've had a bit of time to reflect on this. So there's been a lot of talk about it on Twitter. And I think, we did our best to put forward the possible scenarios that maybe don't include selling a player or selling multiple players in the transfer window on the last podcast. Peter, have you had kind of like a eureka moment where you've just thought, oh, I know what we can do. This will be what they're doing. This is how we're going to raise 20 million to spend on players?
I haven't, no. I think what we're seeing now is really desperation rather than hope, because I think the strategy here is hope, and as they usually say, hope isn't the strategy. And Chanshiri, by the sounds also by what Dumhausen wrote today in the Star, it sounds like he's getting fed some information from the club on what Chanshiri thinks and what he wants to demonstrate with the appointment of Bruce, that he thinks he can still win promotion this season and get to the playoffs. So I think what Chanshiri is really doing here is saying, yeah, no, we're way over the limit of profitability and sustainability that we're allowed to do. And as we've discussed before, it's about 15 million that we're in the wrong. But he's probably thinking, well, I'm going to chuck some more money at it. And yeah, we're going to have a big breach of the P&S, loss limit. But, he's probably thinking, if I don't win promotion, I can sell some players in the summer, and maybe not reduce the breach to a non-breach, but maybe reduce it somewhat so he can perhaps escape with a transfer embargo for, say, 2 or 3 windows, maybe a small points deduction, and so on. But it's the way I see it, it's not really a strategy. It's more it's a Hail Mary pass. It's desperate. It's going into the casino and putting everything on black and hoping it turns out right. And actually, if you look at what the bookmakers are saying, the odds of us winning promotion is about 150 to 1. So it's a lot harder than putting everything on black, actually. The thing is, Birmingham are due. Some reports say they're due a disciplinary hearing in February. The club themselves haven't confirmed that, but it's been speculated that they'll be deducted somewhere between 10 and 15 points. Could be as low as 6. It's hard to say, but there are different conflicting reports, and Birmingham are remaining very tight-lipped about it. The thing is, Birmingham's breach last season that they're being punished for will be small scale compared to the breach we'll be doing. They probably put some dents into the car, whereas we'll be crashing through the store window as a comparison. So let's say Birmingham end up with a points deduction penalty of 10 points for a small breach. And we do a big breach because Chancery refuses to sell players, or we can't move them on, or whatever happens in the summer. We could be looking at a large points deduction, and it would probably be this season. And I mean, if we end up on 60 points and we get a points deduction of, let's say, 15 points, that's us flirting with relegation all of a sudden. So I really think it's ill-advised what he's doing, and I really can't get my hand around it. I really, 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 really hope that someone at the club has figured out some way around the rules, or they know that the rules are about to be changed because they've managed to convince enough clubs to change the rules, because there is some added pressure on the EFL also over the recent TV deal and what have you. So that might be the I wouldn't say strategy, but the but the sketch of what Chancery is thinking, that to hell with it, I'm going to give it a go, and if it doesn't work out, well, we'll try to save the scraps and try to reduce the hurt that it's going to produce. But
so Peter, I wonder if I could almost just posit a devil's advocate position for a second, because I think if we followed the trajectory of everything that we've discussed on this podcast over the past year, and the numbers we've been analysing, it's very hard to escape the conclusion that you've just outlined, right? Which is that, we know that we have a substantive gap to make up in terms of income. That income isn't realised unless we sell players. What's being promised is spending more money, which expands the gap, and we end up in a very, very bad place with P&S. But somewhere between last week, when we recorded the kind of the update post the forum, and this weekend, this may just be the benefit of too much Peak District air while I've been running around the hills of Sheffield. I was kind of thinking, would Steve Bruce have accepted this role if the consequences of this breach are as likely and as profound as we're describing? And I just kind of raise that question because, we know that we're not party to all the facts. And I think a couple of the allusions that you just raised, possible changes in the rules, possible maneuverings behind the scenes, you just have to leave open the possibility that there is some mechanism, some manoeuvring that means that Wednesday have a possible route to resolution here. Because I can't believe he would commit himself to this club if he didn't think this was going to be a project that he could succeed at. Whether that be, taking a certain position this year and then being in a position for recovery next. But when we talk about noted journalists referring confidently to the fact that there are funds available for him, that suggests the ability to spend those funds. So there's something in the equation that doesn't quite add up. And I'm just leaving open the possibility that maybe maybe there's a little bit more hope out there than we necessarily realise. I don't know whether that in any way resonates with the two of you, or whether I've just been taking too much mountain air the last week.
No, I think you make a fair. It's fair. I'm the same, where I've sat and thought, well, it can't actually be as bad as we think it could be, because the warning signs have been there for ages. We'd surely have come up with a better solution to this, and we wouldn't now be talking about, as Peter said, it's putting everything on black when we've already put everything on black. We've got nothing left. We're now, we've taken off all our jewellery. We're down to our underpants. We're now betting with, the scraps that we've got left. And basically we're just going to go and nick some money off someone else now and start putting that on black instead. I totally see where you're coming from, and I've had similar thoughts, which is, we are, as we are at pains to point out every time, none of us are experts in this field. Least of all me. You guys have a much better and firmer understanding of all this than I do. Maybe we've just done all the sums wrong somewhere along the line, or maybe there's a huge big loophole that we've not kind of looked at and not considered. And there's going to be some way of being able to do it. Or maybe when they talk about money being available, that maybe we're really talking about a little bit of money, and maybe if the shortfall is not as big as we thought it was, then, it's still something that we can balance. Or maybe we're actually going to sell players and it's all going to kind of work its way through. That scenario that you talked about there, Peter, I mean, that is just absolute, that's the stuff of nightmares, that kind of just, let's have one last go at this in the hope we can get into the Premier League. And, if we get a huge points deduction, a transfer embargo for 2 or 3 windows, this stuff's just, this is just awful. If that's the case, we've got to cling on to some kind of hope that can't be what's about to unfold. Peter, I need to revisit something that we did talk about last time, but it's coming round again and again. A lot of people saying it, and that is this idea of something involving the stadium. Now, I know that we kind of looked at this idea of him kind of selling the stadium to himself or to his family. Let's say that there's absolutely no suggestion that this is going to happen, but I'm plucking this as an example because it's happened elsewhere. Let's say that Sheffield Wednesday come to some kind of deal where they sell the stadium to the council and rent it back. How does that work with P&S accounts?
Well, I think James covered it quite well last time. It would be creating a windfall for this season, but the income we get this season would disappear next season. So you're right back at square one unless you reduce your cost significantly, because then you're missing that income next season. And then you have to, on top of that, you have to pay the expenses of the rent. I mean, if we look at other countries, like Real Madrid, they've been bailed out a lot of times by the local council in Madrid, that bought that training ground for a fortune and then sold it back to them for €1 and stuff like that. But it's not likely that you'll see that done by the Sheffield City Council, is it? So that only leaves the other option that another company or a bank or someone will come in and say they want to take this on. The thing is, we discussed this last time as well. Bournemouth did something like this, sold the stadium and leased it back, but they actually won out of the deal again because it's a bad deal. Because if you want, it could be a risky situation for the investor, so they'll want a big return on it, and so over a time period, you're actually losing more money than you're gaining. So I mean, it's as you were saying, it's taking off the underpants and putting them on the poker table, and once they're gone, then you've got nothing on. So yeah, I really can't see it, to be honest, that it would in any way work. And again, if it's a clear loophole, by any means, if you look at how the clubs acted financially, organisationally over the Chancery period, we've not been, to be kind, we've not been the most professionally run club. So you'd expect other clubs that are a lot more professionally run to have spotted these loopholes, supposed loopholes that we would have spotted in the best of all situations, and trying to now abuse. But they haven't. I mean, Derby have done some back and forth with different company constructions and structures and what have you. But that is again, it's the margins they're moving at. It's not a big money sums that they're moving around. And the actual fact is not this last fence forum, but the one before that. The club themselves said to stay within the P&S limit. But in this season, we have to break even, and that's where the £50 million arrears that I keep referring to are coming from, because it's the club themselves saying it, and they said that back in think it was back in October, the last fans forum, or September. Can't remember for certain now. But I mean, nothing has really changed between then and now with regards to income. Probably the income is worse than it has been because of falling gates during the era of Luhukay. So I really hope you guys are right. I really hope it, and it's a similar situation to what we've been discussing before. That it looks grim when you look at the numbers, but you dearly hope that you're wrong.
So I have just one little conspiracy theory for you, and I'm going to be completely honest. I'm literally the world's worst person for conspiracy theories because I spend most of my time shooting them down. But this is one that I played through in my mind and which actually stands up, at least in the short term. So you're absolutely right, Peter. A sale and leaseback arrangement for Hillsborough doesn't work because the value that we would sell the land for, essentially for the continuing operation of an aging football stadium, isn't particularly high, and the income that it would generate wouldn't close the gap. The costs we would incur would be on a rolling basis. It just wouldn't be material enough to make a difference. But play through a scenario in which we sell the land for an alternative use, and all of a sudden the land value increases. If you're talking about retail or if you're talking about accommodation or otherwise. Now, that would be about as unpopular as you could possibly imagine. It would be a long-term commitment to move away from Hillsborough, but it would potentially yield short-term income of a higher order, which would then give the club options in terms of its long-term strategy. But that's the only way in my mind that I can see a deal involving the stadium that would actually be material enough to actually, have impact on the P&S in the short term. But I talk about lighting a match on a tinderbox. That would be one of the most unpopular things you could possibly do without consulting the fan base before going ahead.
Yeah, and the other thing is, if the land was that valuable for the use, why is the Wednesday car park laying bare? It's right next to the stadium, isn't it? So the value of the land around Hillsborough isn't great, is it? So
these are reasonable points, although you could point to park views from nice apartments that are built either in the style of Highbury down in Islington. Clearly, Hillsborough is not Islington, but it's still a nice area in Sheffield. So, like I said, it doesn't necessarily stand up, but it's the only way I can see that a stadium deal actually generates the revenue we would need.
Okay. We'll between us, we'll keep thinking, keep trying to come up with some ideas, and let's hope in the meantime that the club decide that they're going to be a bit more transparent about kind of what's going on financially and how we're funding any arrivals during January. Worth mentioning, of course, at the moment we haven't spent any money during January, so there's still we're kind of talking about this as if we've committed to spending millions, which we haven't. It may just be a bit of bravado from the chairman, but I guess we'll see. Right, okay, let's move on then, and let's just have a bit of a look at 2018 overall, because we've kind of touched on the final stats for Jos, which, to be honest, are pretty much the final stats for Sheffield Wednesday for the season. Peter, anything else from 2018 from your side that really kind of stands out?
The long term. I think we talked about this before. The long term trend in the so-called expected goals numbers just deteriorating over the year. It was bad already, and then it just kept deteriorating as the year went on. And now we're finally seeing a very drastic a change in a positive direction. But we've been performing like a team in a relegation zone for the best part of a year. Even when we're doing really well, and we've covered this before, even when we're doing really well at the end of last season, we were overperforming the chances we were creating, and there might be something in the teams that we were playing didn't have much to play for, and all those factors that you can always point to. But I mean, 2017 was the botched 150th anniversary celebration, and in some ways you could say we didn't expect a year could be worse than 2017, but 2018 just stepped up to the plate and did the job, didn't it? So thankfully we had a good end to the year, and I mean there is some hope now, and I totally agree with what James said before, that it's actually interesting to watch us play again, and you got that mojo back about being a Wednesday fan again, which is remarkable considering how depressed we were all at being Wednesday fans just less than a month ago. So I mean, if things can change that quickly, then hopefully the trajectory of change continues. But 2018 was a bit like Jos Luhukay, a total write-off.
I'm quite glad that we finished that little segment with a bit of positivity because I think we're often accused of kind of coming across a bit negative, which was never the intention of this podcast. It's just, as we said before, kind of coincided with us not having the best year in the history of the club. But there is no way of sugarcoating it. It has been a bit of a nightmare. But the good thing is it's gone. We're unbeaten in 4. We're unbeaten in 2019. I accept there's only one game, but there we go. Right, let's move on then. Let's move on to stat of the month. Now, if you remember this, we didn't do it in episode 2 because it wasn't kind of a normal episode. We did it in episode 1, where each of the three of us puts forward our kind of favourite stat from the last month. I'll kind of confess I've slightly cheated here in terms of the fact that my stat is not particularly relevant to the last month. But it kind of is relevant to the last month. You'll see what I mean. James, do you want to go first?
This is a bit like last month, isn't it, James? Whereby you let Peter and I go first, saying that your stat isn't that great, and then it turns out your stat's really good.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm setting myself up for before by going first. Yes. So my stat is 15 in 15, which I'll let both of you hazard a guess as to what I'm referring to.
15 in 15. Something to do with the number of games that we've won while George Boyd's had a beard.
It's Boxing Day, isn't it?
I don't know how many Boxing Days George Boyd has had a beard, but you're both way off. It's the number of pints that you can pull in 15 minutes in the grandstand bar, apparently. I raise this because it's topical and because I was at the Birmingham game on New Year's Day, and I was being effusive in my praise of the team after an absolutely excellent first half, which just to kind of pick up on the previous point, was as enjoyable as 45 minutes of watching football at Hillsborough as I can remember in a long time, probably going back to Brighton in the playoffs. And then me and my dad went downstairs for a pint, and it was then sort of being rocked back into commercial reality as we stood in this queue of about 5 people who were ordering, roughly about 3 pints apiece. 15 to 15 might be a slight stretch, but it took the entirety of the half for those pints to be poured. And the reason why I raised the stat is because it actually has a little bit of a contribution towards our PNS conversation. So, I put this tweet out lamenting this, and the amount of reaction it got from around the fan base, unsurprisingly considering the hot water issues in the North Stand, was pretty profound. Wednesday are missing a trick commercially if we can't simply serve beer to football fans when football fans want it, in timely fashion and in reasonable quantities, so we make a little bit of revenue in the stands. So my ask to Wednesday, if they're listening, is go out and look at a few commercially reputable football stadiums or sports stadiums and realise that there are many ways of doing that in a far more efficient way, and you'll have a lot of happy Wednesdayites on your hands. It's not really complicated.
Yeah, makes sense. I was actually chatting, in the North Stand, so the lower bit of the North Stand, they've got those different suites that are named after rivers. So there's like the Riverland Suite and all those different things that are just basically rooms built under the bottom few rows of stairs that I assume are just used for storage or something. I'm like, why do we not build some new bars in those, and then we can serve, have like a bottle bar and stuff like that. Anyway, going off topic, but I thought that was relevant. Peter, what is your stat of the month?
Yeah, a bit like you, I'm not going to focus on the month, but on the time ahead, because as you said, we've been accused of being depressing, and there was even a guy who said I apparently enticed people to suicide with the stuff I was saying. So I'm trying to remain positive here, but I'll focus on our new manager. And there's a website called Transfermarkt, which is a German website, also used by agents and football clubs, which try to do the transfer fees and transfer values of a lot of players. Some of their stuff is a bit off, but most of it really checks out. So the interesting number I'm going to throw out there is £305 million. And I'll a bit like you, I'll let you guess what that number is.
That's got to be something to do with. It's got to be to do with money with Steve Bruce either spent, or is it the net profit on players that he's bought and sold?
It's the former. I don't actually have the net profit, but I have what he has spent. So he's in his career as a manager, he's spent £305 million on players.
How much of it was on cabbages? Can I ask that? Do we know how much he spent on
he did buy Shane Long and Robert Snodgrass, didn't he? So I guess that tells you a bit about his eye for a player. But I mean, it's just interesting. I find, because he definitely needs to buy players, and it's an excellent point you made before, James, that he also manages to sell them on for profit, some of the players at least. But he needs that initial investment probably in the playing squad to be able to move some of them on again. And if he buys a player now and we have to wait 2 years before we can sell him at a profit, we don't really have the time financially. So it's just I thought it was an interesting number because it tells you something about Steve Bruce's managerial style, and he really changes the squads he inherits, and he'll be looking to do the same at ours.
Okay, good stuff. All right, so my start again is, as I mentioned, this is more of a general statistic, and I'll be absolutely amazed if anyone gets this. I might have to give you a clue to help you. So it's 3.1 in 100. I can give a clue if it's needed.
Yeah, we will need that.
All right.
Is that 3.1 times George Boyd has stayed stood up in 100 runs down the right wing?
And they were all in the Birmingham game. Right, so 3.1 grams in 100 grams.
I'm worried about the direction this is going now. Is this a controversial dressing room secret?
I've got it. That's mushrooms.
It is mushrooms, yeah. It's the amount of protein that is in mushrooms, 3.1 grams in every 100 grams of mushroom, which would actually give you 6% of your daily recommended allowance of protein, or what you should be having in a day. So actually, I wonder whether or not Jos was onto something with the fact that mushrooms, in terms of their nutritional value, not really that high. 6% in one portion, it's not that much.
Dreadful protein to carb ratio as well, I should imagine.
Carbs are the same, by the way, 3.3 grams.
So it's only 1-to-1, basically. Oh, yeah, that's useless as a recovery fuel.
So there we go. Right, okay, so that is our stats of the month. Now, our new feature now that we're up and running, which is your opportunity as our listeners to fire your questions at our true resident expert. So this is a bit where me and James can put our feet up for a little bit, because this is Ask Peter, where you get the chance to fire any questions that you want at Peter on Twitter over the course of the month. And I guess that Peter tries to rattle through as many as possible. Now, I've not seen any of these questions. I don't know if James has either. So I'm quite intrigued, Peter, as to what you've had come flooding in on Twitter over the course of the last few weeks.
Yeah, it's been really great with the feedback, and I mean, we asked for it last time, and it's been great to see people asking questions and having interesting points of views on what stats they wanted us to look at. I'm just going to rattle through them as well as I can. At Matt RPSWSC asked whether possession, what stat we find the most flawed. Which are the most accurate, and he mentions that he thinks possession is a bit useless, and I totally agree. Possession stats don't tell you much about teams, because in general, teams that are good keep the ball because they're good, not because they have a lot of possession. And I mean, Reading. There's another thing with possession that people often confuse. Teams that have a lot of possession with teams that are good and good that play good football and are nice to watch. Remember Reading in 2016-17, Jaap Stam's Reading, they had 57% possession on average, the third highest in the championship. And I don't think I offend anyone if I say they were probably the most boring football team anyone's ever watched play football. So possession out of the window. At Gledbot asks whether Stephen Fletcher only scores difficult goals and not the easy ones. And that's actually a nice way of examining that, and that's looking at the expected goals value of the goals that Stephen Fletcher scored. And while he's been with us, he scored 15 non-penalty goals, and actually 9 of those 15 non-penalty goals have had a probability of being a goal lower than 10%. That is, an average player would only score that goal 1 out of 10 times. So there's actually something to it that Fletcher scores difficult goals, and I mean we saw in our last game he did similar. At Aaron Johnson asks whether our transfer strategy has been successful over the years, and how have we done in the transfer market? How have the players we've had, how have they done after they've left us? Have they gone on to better things? And again, I'm going to use Transfermarkt's values here, and it's a bit of a tough question to answer. But if we look at Transfermarkt, you can look at that transfer value after leaving us, and actually the only 2 players I could find that after leaving us increased their value quite significantly has been Michael Antonio and Chris Brunt, and that's a long time ago, isn't it? And it really underlines how poor we've been at developing players. And the only players that have been at ours and gone on to better things have been loan players. But that's par for the course, because they were always going to be, or more likely to be better after playing for us than other players. So I think that's quite interesting, actually, how bad we are at creating value with the players we buy. Especially because, as we've discussed at length in the pods we've done on the FFP situation, that we need to start thinking of our playing squad as something that needs to be dynamic, and we need to move players on to fund new players and have a steady flow of players in and out of the club. So we fund that. At Scott_H2 asked whether our playing record under Jos Luhukay with a back four was worse than with a non-back four, and actually yes, that is the case. When we played with a back four in this season, that was 12 matches that Luhukay played with a back four. We actually conceded 27 goals, and we only got 0.83 points per game. Whereas in the 10 matches we played with 3 defenders, or 5 defenders, depending on how you define it, but 3 centre-backs, we only conceded 13 goals and we got 1.4 points per game. So that's a marked difference. And the interesting thing is that we're now playing a back four with Lee Bullen, but it's a very different back four, isn't it? With Hutchinson dropping into the back line. So,
yeah. So
we can actually see a difference in how we're setting up, and following on from that question, at Waddles Mullets, great username by the way, asks whether Jos Luhukay changed his team too much, and there are actually stats to back this up, and I was quite astonished by it when I looked at it. WhoScored.com does formations numbers, for Fortune and so on, of every game in a season. And this season alone, in the 22 games that Luhukay was in charge, we used 10 different formations. I was amazed at that. Under Carvajal, it was only something like 3 or 4 in a season, I think, and we pretty much stuck to the same formation most of the time. So I found that astonishing, to be honest.
I don't think I can even name 10 formations. Are there enough players on the pitch to have 10 different formations? How is that possible? That's crazy.
But you can start with one where you don't play a striker.
That was last
I suppose. Yeah. Wow.
So but I was astonished by that when I looked into it, and I've not done any benchmark of other teams how they've done, but I would imagine that we will definitely be one of the highest teams in the division for that. Then the at the Revelator asks whether we could do like a comparison of players, and then also look at what he calls underrated players and players that come in for a lot of stick. Players like Liam Palmer, Fox, and Joey Pelopessi. And I've actually looked at the difference between Pelopessi and Sam Hutchinson, because Pelopessi in some ways was brought in to play the Hutchinson role. But if you look at the numbers of the two players over their careers at Wednesday, Pelopessi is actually a different player to Hutchinson, and quite different too. He's more creative in that he creates more key passes and assists per game than Hutchinson does. He hits fewer longer passes. He has fewer passes overall, and his short passes are more precise than Hutchinson's. He enters into fewer aerial battles, and he loses more of them. He has a lot more unsuccessful touches, and he has more shots, but also a very low conversion. And he blocks a lot fewer shots, but also fewer crosses and passes. Again, you can see Hutchinson's ability to cover here. He only clears the ball half the amount that Hutchinson does. And surprise, surprise, he gets a lot fewer yellow cards and red cards. He's only actually fouled half as much as Sam Hutchinson. So, and the really interesting thing is he actually only commits the same number of fouls as Hutchinson. You'd have probably expected to be Hutchinson to have a lot more fouls, but there you go. Pelopessi only has half the number of interceptions that Hutchinson has. Again, it's not one number that tells you something, but I think that's a really interesting. If you couple that with the low amount of block shots, a lot fewer block shots, and also that he's dribbled past twice as much as Hutchinson has been, and that he enters into fewer tackles and has a lower success rate with the tackles he enters into. We've actually probably been casting Pelopessi into the wrong role, and it was interesting that he came onto the pitch when Reach had to go off at West Bromwich, and he came onto the pitch and played in a different role because Hutchinson was now screening the defence, and he played a lovely ball over the top for Bannon, and he did probably the most of that he's more natural at in that game than he's done before. So maybe Hutchinson coming back gives us not just Hutchinson the really good player, but also improves Pelopessi as a player because he doesn't have to do stuff that he's not as good at as Hutchinson is. So I found that interesting as well, and I think that just about wraps up the mailbag for this time. But that's about it.
Thank you. If you want to submit a question for us to look at, I say us, for Peter to look at next time around, drop us a tweet at owlsaboutstat. Right, next up, James, coming to you for On This Day In. When are you taking us back to today?
You know what? I was kind of I was feeling a bit reflective over the Christmas holidays, mostly because it's dark in UK parlance pretty much 67% of the time. So I guess you have to think about the world in slightly different ways to which you would if you're in a part of the world that actually has normal daylight. But no, I'm taking it all the way back to 1959. The middle of the last century, which is actually 60 years ago today, so 3rd of January 1959. And this is triggered by a little comment my dad made to me at the Birmingham game. I alluded to the fact I went with him earlier on. And he said to me, you know what, it's 60 years ago this week, James, that I came to Hillsborough for the first time. I thought, 60 years? That's a bloody long time to watch depressing, useless football. But I thought I'd do a little bit of research about that first game. So I dug into it. And on the 3rd of January 1959, 60 years ago tonight, Sheffield Wednesday beat Ipswich Town 3-1 at Hillsborough with goals from Alan Finney, Roy Shiner, and the eternally loved Redfern Frobert. But that season really bears some reflection because it's one of Wednesday's most successful seasons in history. It's a season that we romped to the Division 2 title. We ended up with 62 points back in an era when you only got 2 points for a win. So if you multiply that out, we'd have got 90 points over the same season with today's math, which makes it pretty much unparalleled in terms of Wednesday's performance. And then it opened up an era in which in the early 60s Wednesday were a real force in British football. I think we finished third, second, sixth, and eighth in the run up to the 1966 FA Cup final, which obviously went a bit pear-shaped, but a really amazing era for Sheffield Wednesday, and it probably explains why my dad got hooked and then basically put me in the situation where I got to be punished for that 30 years later on. But it was a real reflection on the fact that we go through these ebbs and flows in Wednesday fandom, but there have been some amazing times in the past, and hopefully there will be again. But the one thing I wanted to pull out from a stats point of view was that season, over the course of 42 games, we scored 106 goals, which is
wow.
Something that's championed on the other side of the city as the centenary year of goal scoring. Well, Wednesday weren't too far behind in that season. So a few things in the past that we should reflect on and enjoy this time of year, and then let's look forward to the future with a little bit of optimism.
Good stuff. Thank you, James. So the conclusion of that, by the way, is you're saying that we're going to get promoted this season with 90 points. That's definitely going to happen. That's what you're saying. Yeah, that's the bit that I heard from that. Yeah.
Which is entirely plausible, because over the course of that season, we in modern football point scoring accumulated adjusted terms, we racked up 2.114 points per game. So if we do that over the second half of the season, we might just scrape the playoffs.
Brilliant. Fantastic. That's it. I'm sold. Great. All is good with the world. Right. Let's do a little bit of looking ahead. Obviously, we've done a lot of looking backwards. We've got that kind of busy Christmas period out of the way. I've got to say, I was quite worried going into kind of Christmas and New Year that we could be, sitting down the beginning of January, genuinely looking at our club being in the relegation zone. So I think the fact that, taking 8 points from those 4 games, and the league table looking a lot more healthy is very nice. But let's look at what's coming up. Now, obviously, this weekend is FA Cup. So we can kind of put that to one side. But I know, Peter, you tweeted the other day about our run of league games once we've certainly got the whole fixture out of the way, because they're banging form at the moment, and that's our next league game. But there's a run of games after that you feel will probably suit us pretty well.
Yeah. We've got Wigan at home, Brentford at home, Ipswich away, Reading at home, Millwall away, Rotherham away, and then we head into a more tricky time of year. But I mean, those fixtures alone, 6 of those 7 teams are actually below us in the table, and between them, these 6 teams have only had 4 wins from the last 24 matches, and 3 of those wins have actually been Millwall, who've have had a bit of a renaissance of late. But all these teams are teams you'd say, even under Luhukay, you'd probably go into the game hoping, or at least, well, not expecting, but maybe hoping that we win. But with the turnaround in form we've seen under Lee Bullen and a new manager coming in, or at least his assistants at first, this could be the best possible start to the year with games like this. Wigan have really gone off the boil. Brentford have actually played quite well this season, but have just struggled to put points on the board and have looked quite fragile since Dean Smith left them. Ipswich are this season's Rotherham of a few years ago. They're completely out of sorts. Reading have been dropping towards the drop zone as well. And as I said, Millwall have actually had a bit of a renaissance of late, but again, a team we've done reasonably well against in the past, and we've could probably see us do well against again, considering how we're playing just now. And then obviously our so-called rivals, Rotherham away. It's a tricky derby game and all that, but Rotherham are a better team than the sum of their parts. But again, a team that we'd probably expect or hope to beat even away from home. So there's a point to be made that all these games could actually be won. I mean, the whole game is really tricky. As you say, they're in really good form, and hopefully they have one or two of their best players poached by bigger clubs before we play them, but that's probably too hopeful. But we could actually be looking at a really good cushion of points over the next month or two.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news, by the way, but chances are that Brentford game won't happen because obviously we've got Luton in the Cup on Saturday at home. Brentford have Oxford at home in the Cup on Saturday. If either of us win our third round game, then that would be the weekend of the fourth round.
Sure.
So I would guess it's fairly unlikely that Brentford game will be happening, so that'll be pushed back to a little bit later on in the season, but might still fall within that kind of period of kind of games that look quite winnable for us on paper. Right, okay, that's I think that's pretty much going to wrap us up then for episode 2 of Owls About Stat. Don't forget you can find us on Twitter at Owls About Stat. James, give us your Twitter, and also, I mean, obviously you've been over for a few weeks. You've seen a few games. Great to go down to West Brom with you. But just off the back of that, just remind us as well how many years it is now since you've seen Wednesday win away, if you would do, please.
James, sometimes when I go through an away day with you, I kind of assume you won't remember what we talked about, but it seems that your mind is sharper than sometimes it appears. So my Twitter handle is at Manhattan Owl, but I may adjust it shortly to at I haven't seen an away win for 20 years, which is entirely accurate because the last away win I saw was in 1998-99. Everton away, in which we won 2-1 and Benito Carboni scored twice. So, I've got a little bit of work to do on that front. I do keep on trying. I mean, I've been really ramping up my away day appearances over the last couple of years, but we just continually either lose or concede last minute goals. So, at least I stayed true to form at West Brom on Saturday. It was a great away day there. So thank you for shepherding me around the good bars of Birmingham.
Pleasure. Peter, do you want to give us your Twitter handle? And when was the last time that you saw Wednesday win away? Because I imagine it's probably more recently than James.
Yeah, my Twitter handle is at PLOEHMANN. And it's a bit of a touchy subject, my record. If we look at games in the Championship, I've been to 16 games in the Championship. I've seen us win 2 of those games. And 3 draws and 11 losses. And my away record is even worse. I was there when we lost 3-5 at Peterborough. I was there when we lost 2-3 to United at Bramall Lane. I was there last season at the QPR game, the 2-4 loss. I was there when we started the season losing 4-1 at Ipswich. I've seen a lot of. I've actually, it's not really present. There's a reason I'm
just going to ban you both from going to any more away games, and then chances are, we'll be in the Premier League within a couple of years. You can get me on Twitter at James Marriott. Thank you for your company. Let us have your thoughts, your feedback, and of course your questions for the next episode of Owls About Stats, and we will speak to you in a few weeks.